Muito bom dia, pessoal. Estamos já ao vivo então com a nossa transmissão, né? O início então da nossa maratona de lives, né? Que já iniciou, né? Então, agora na parte da madrugada, né? Nós vamos acompanhar aí no nosso canal Matemática com Will.p no segmento Will PTV in Space, One Docking da Crew 5 Endeavour, Dragon Endeavour, né, que está nesse momento ainda na Estação Espacial Internacional, né? A escotilha da nave então já foi fechada, né, para trás, né? Da pouco. E o undock então está previsto para acontecer às 4h05 da manhã. E também ainda hoje, né, se você não está por dentro da programação de hoje, então eu vou contar para vocês o que vai acontecer ainda hoje, né? Ainda hoje vamos ter, se tudo der certo aí, 2 lançamentos, né? A partir das 4 horas, das 2 horas da tarde, nós vamos acompanhar então a nova tentativa de voo do primeiro veículo feito em uma impressora 3D, né? Da missão Good Luck and Have Fun, né? Da Relative Space. E às 7h35 nós vamos acompanhar então a segunda missão do Electron da Rocket Lab no estado da Virgínia, nos Estados Unidos, com a missão Stronger Together. E em seguida, às 9h55, nós vamos acompanhar então o retorno e o splashdown da Crew 5 Dragon Endeavour. Então, tudo isso na programação de hoje, aqui do nosso canal Matemática com Will.p, segmento Will PTV in Space. Então, quem é novo aí no canal, quem ainda não é inscrito, se inscreva e deixa o like para aumentar então a relevância aí durante a nossa transmissão de hoje, certo? Então, dentro de instantes, nós vamos entrar em contato então direto com a Estação Espacial Internacional, para então acompanharmos aí o undocking da Crew 5 Dragon Endeavour. Já. Dentro de instantes, tá? E também, né, anunciando para vocês aí que no dia 14 nós vamos acompanhar então o lançamento da missão de carga CRS 27 a partir então das 5 para as 9 da noite, tá? No dia 14. Aí então nós vamos ter o lançamento da Dragon, né, para a missão CRS 27, a missão de carga em direção à Estação Espacial Internacional. Também estou aguardando a confirmação, talvez aí, a live domingo, dia 12, com a missão então com o veículo Proto-M da Rússia, né? Mas como essa missão é uma missão militar russa, então não sei se eles ainda vão fazer transmissão, né? Estou aguardando aí a confirmação deles lá. Já estamos ao vivo, então vamos acompanhar aí a missão do undocking da Crew 5 Dragon Endeavour. Então o undocking está programado para acontecer às 4h05 da manhã. E o retorno e o splashdown vai acontecer então 19 horas depois, né? O início da nossa transmissão às 9h55 da noite no dia de hoje. Então já estamos com imagens aí ao vivo do centro. Aí, portanto, começou então a transmissão oficial. Estamos oficialmente ao vivo. e com áudio também. Launch America. Estamos ao vivo agora, oficialmente ao vivo. E aí, portanto, estamos ao vivo aí da Estação Espacial Internacional. Estamos aí com as imagens da Dragon Endeavour para vocês, da missão Crew 5.
In Hawthorne, California, and we're expecting the Dragon spacecraft to push away from the ISS at about 11:20 p.m. Pacific time, or about 2:20 a.m. Eastern time.
Então estamos aí com a expectativa aí do undocking às 4h05 da manhã.
Cassada, along with Japan's Koichi Wakata, and Roscosmos' cosmonaut Kikina.
Lembrando que os astronautas, né, estão a bordo então, da Crew 5 Dragon Endeavour, são eles aí, né? Os astronautas da NASA, Cassada, Nicole Mann, astronauta da JAXA, Koichi Wakata, e o cosmonauta da Rússia, né, Kikina.
My name is Shiva, and I'm a space operations engineer here at SpaceX. Joining me today from NASA Communications is Leah Cheshire.
Thanks for having me, Shiva. I'm excited to get to work together tonight. It's always great to be here. And once Dragon departs station, the crew's flight home is expected to
Então, dentro de instantes, teremos aí o undocking, né, que é a desacoplagem, cápsula Dragon Endeavour da Estação Espacial Internacional, às 4h05 da manhã.
And this will increase the distance between the spacecraft and the space station. Dragon will also execute a phasing burn that will lower its.
E ainda hoje, né, às 2 da tarde, teremos aí a cobertura da missão Good Luck, Have Fun da Relative Space. E às 7h35, cobertura também da missão Stronger Together da Rocket Lab. E às 9h55, acompanhar então o retorno da Crew 5. O retorno e o splashdown da Crew 5 Dragon Endeavour.
That will be followed by the crew getting picked up at sea by one of SpaceX's recovery vessels, currently targeting recovery vessel Shannon.
Today on board the space station, we have the Expedition 68 crew led by Roscosmos cosmonaut and space station commander Sergei Prokopyev. Of course, just like the approach to the International Space Station, Dragon's departure and deorbit is designed to be fully autonomous, so that means there shouldn't be any action from the crew members on board. Today, NASA astronaut Steve Bowen, who arrived last week on Crew 6, helped the crew members prepare for departure, and he can watch from the cupola, but the prime departure monitoring role falls on Nicole Mann, our commander in Crew 5, and Cassada, also inside Dragon. The mission control teams in Houston and here in Hawthorne will back them up. To learn a little bit more about how things are going at Johnson Space Center and hear about how the station crew has been preparing to send Crew 5 home and what we can expect from here until Dragon departs, I'm going to toss it to my friend Dan Hewitt.
Hey Leah, and hey Shiva, great to see you guys, great to talk with you, and welcome everybody inside the International Space Station Flight Control Room at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. It has been an eventful night already as we're getting prepared to have Crew 5 undock from the International Space Station. We did a little bit of a sleep shift, the crew waking up a few hours earlier.
Momentos aí de expectativas, né, daqui a pouco para o undocking.
That's always a watch item. We have to have
às 4h05 da manhã, falta pouco aí, são 3h50 da manhã, no horário de Brasília. Falta pouquinho para o nosso undocking.
Once we got past that, the crew was woken up and they started stepping through everything to get ready, basically to come home today. They've been moving cargo on board Dragon over the last couple of days as they get ready, and then they also started carrying in all of what's called power cargo, so stuff that needs electricity from Dragon systems to keep it cold during that flight home. That's some of the last stuff that we put inside. They did a couple of other checks, make sure the center of gravity was right. They installed a LiO cartridge, getting Dragon's carbon dioxide scrubbing system ready. The crew got suited up. They did 4 leak checks of their suits once they were
Pessoal que
seated
está
inside
chegando
Dragon.
agora,
We got
estamos
4
acompanhando
leak
então o
checks.
momento da
And then after the
desacoplagem
hatches were closed, which
da
that
cápsula
happened a little
Dragon
over an hour
Endeavour
ago, we
da
were able to
Estação
get into what's
Espacial
known as
Internacional.
vestibule depress. So
Já
we've
está
gone
programado
through
então
that.
para
The vestibule, that's
iniciar
that space between
às
the
4 e
station
5 da
and the
manhã.
Dragon spacecraft itself. That's been brought down to just above vacuum. There's almost no atmosphere left between those 2 hatches. And then after that's completed, we have about a 30-minute timer that goes up just to make sure we don't see any pressure differentials inside that vestibule, making sure that we're not having any leaks from
E o
Dragon or
retorno
the
deles
station
então está
side.
previsto
And
para
after we get through
acontecer a
that, we
partir
can
das
get into the undock.
9h55,
So
né?
that
Com live a
started a
partir das
little bit behind
9h55 da
schedule,
noite
so
de hoje,
our undocking time moved about 15
ainda
minutes to the right, but
neste
good
dia.
news for us, we actually weren't going to be able to have video of
É o
Dragon
retorno
docking
e
if we were at a
splashdown.
normal time. So this is going to work out great for us, and we're going to be able to see Dragon fly away. So all of that has been done so far. We're waiting for that vestibule leak check to be completed. Then we start to take Dragon's power systems to internal power. It's been drawing power from station. We also change all of its data from that hardline connection to station over to all of the wireless communications that it's going to use to talk. And then it's time for undock. And so we'll send an undocking command that's targeted to go about 15 minutes after the hour right now, and that kicks off a 5-minute sequence where the umbilicals will retract, the hooks will start to open, then 5 minutes later those thrusters fire, and Dragon will separate and start the flight home.
E lembrando que ainda hoje vamos acompanhar aí 2 lançamentos, né? Primeiro, teste de voo, né, da nova tentativa do teste de voo do primeiro veículo feito na impressora 3D da Relative Space, a partir das 2 da tarde, e às 7h35 da noite, a missão Stronger Together da Rocket Lab.
Thanks a bunch, Dan. That was a really great overview of the undocking sequence.
Tudo isso ainda hoje.
Separation is set for approximately
E no dia 14, a
11:20
partir então das 8h55 da noite, vamos acompanhar então a missão CRS 27, né? Missão de carga da Dragon, Spacex e NASA.
Those umbilicals provided power to and actually communications to the Dragon spacecraft while it was attached to the station. But of course, when we're leaving, we need to put those things back in the undocking
Lembrando que aqui é o único canal que vocês também encontram o áudio da transmissão.
You can see our commander and pilot, and actually in the back corner on the wall, you can see 2 of their mission patches from the Crew 3 and the Crew 5 missions.
Yes, this is not the first flight for this spacecraft. This Dragon vehicle is named Endurance. It's a tradition for the crew members, the first crew that gets to fly on a new spacecraft, to get to name that spacecraft. So Crew 3 chose the name Endurance for this one. Of course, that sticks even when you get a new crew on it. Crew 5 is who you see today in the very foreground of the image. That is Nicole Mann. She is the commander for Crew 5, and she is the first Native American woman to live on the space station. So pretty cool right here on the heels of International Women's Day.
Yeah, and in sort of the background there, but of course not a background member, is our pilot, Josh Cassada. I believe he is a UC Berkeley alum, is that right? Or am I getting that wrong?
Potentially. I'm not 100% sure.
Any case, he is the pilot on the mission. Now, the pilot and the commander both have displays in front of them. They have the ability to send commands to the Dragon spacecraft, and actually, if they needed to, they could pilot the spacecraft, although, fingers crossed that we won't need that today. And they're also wearing their suits right now. We've just gone back to a view on the outside of the capsule. But we heard Dan talking about the suit leak checks that they do earlier on the suits, and the suits are really a safety system for the crew.
Yeah, absolutely. So the suits are custom fitted for each of the crew members. They look pretty comfortable. And before any of these dynamic phases of flight, any of the burns that happen, undockings, launches, you want to make sure that the crew is in their suit, that it's secure, that there are no
Falta
leaks.
pouco
The suit
tempo
is
aí para o
that the
undocking,
crew members are also
é
able
menos de
to
10
communicate with the
minutos.
ground and with each other. And they also have some airflow in their suits as well to help keep them nice and cool.
Yeah, the suits are also made of fire-resistant material. We really have them on board for fire emergency, or if the cabin were to depressurize, then the suits can provide pressurized gases to the crew members and keep them safe while we bring them home. Here's a video of the suit. So we've got the 3D printed helmet that's custom and the visors. There's an umbilical connection on the right leg. And that umbilical connection actually is what provides gas flow to the suits, as well as the communication that you were talking about, Leah. And so there's an inner bladder layer to the
E
suit.
temos
and
alguns
there's
detalhes
outer layers
do
on the suit.
uniforme
The
da
inner layers
SpaceX.
holds the pressure in the suit should we need it, and then the outer layers are fire-resistant material, and also, of course, make them look super cool.
We just saw a note pop up on the bottom of the screen that talked about the boots, and those are able to secure themselves, I guess, kind of click into the footrest. Now, the footrest is part of the seat that can be removed. So when the crew is in an extended free flight period, maybe during launch, if they had, a long time from launch to docking, or like we see tonight, they'll have some extended time from undocking to splashdown tomorrow. They can actually remove those footrests, give themselves a little more room in the capsule. So it's a nice way to open up that space.
Yeah, and of course, everything in the capsule has a function and a purpose. So you talked about how the suits are custom fitted. We actually have some custom inserts on the seats as well, based on the size of each crew member, so they have a good fit in the seat. And that's really for those really dynamic phases, like during the launch and during descent. You start to pick up gravitational acceleration on the body, and we want to make sure all those forces are comfortably put away through the seats and not in an uncomfortable way that could potentially hurt the crew. So that, along with the seat rests, are actually adjustable, and there is like a groove on the bottom of the seat that they lock in their seats into. As we actually step into final prep for departure, we may hear a call from the core reminding them about their visors and reminding them
Para quem é novo
about
no
their
canal aí,
seat
quem
positioning
está chegando
restraints
agora,
ahead of
estamos
the undock
acompanhando a
sequence.
missão
So right now,
pro 5,
we
né?
have
O início do
11 people
retorno,
living on the
do processo, né?
International
Do
Space Station
retorno
for this past
à Terra.
It has been a week, and so that
Então,
is an
o início
even
desse
more
processo,
full
né?
house
Começou
than
já com o
usual.
fechamento da escotilha, da
We
cápsula,
have had some
ainda há
crew
pouco.
members sleeping in
E agora
the
vamos
Dragon.
acompanhar então
It's really
o
important that we're
undocking,
able to space out our crew members. They have their normal
programado
crew
então para
quarters
acontecer
that
às
our
4h05 da manhã.
long-duration, visitors will stay in. Crew 5 was nice enough to
E quem é novo aí no canal, que ainda não é inscrito, né? Se inscreva.
Crew 6 arrivals.
Curte aí a nossa transmissão e compartilhe também. Lembrando que ainda hoje, né, vamos ter 2 lançamentos, um a partir das 2 horas da tarde e o outro a partir das 7h35 da noite. E para fechar o dia, nós vamos acompanhar então a chegada da cápsula Dragon a partir então das 10 horas da noite.
I was just thinking it would be very hard for me to want to go to sleep if that was my window view.
Now, with 11 crew members on board, there's a lot of different cultural diversity. We have, just on this mission, an astronaut from Japan, a cosmonaut from Russia, of course, 2 Americans. That must make for some pretty interesting conversations and meals and just cultural diversity on the station.
Yeah, I think so. And just last week, Sultan Al Niade arrived as one of the Crew 6 crew members, and he is from the United Arab Emirates. So I know they're very proud to have their first long-duration crew member on board. But it is the International Space Station, such a great example of peaceful cooperation with all of our crew members.
Yeah. Okay, so quick timeline check. We are about 15 minutes away from the planned command for undock sequence start. And again, we are once that command is sent, there'll be about a 5-minute period where Dragon will perform some final configurations for undocking. So in that configuration, we open up
5 minutos para o
capture
undocking.
hooks. There are 12 of those around the ring of the docking mechanism, and they hold in the pressure in that vestibule section. Of course, all of that is depressurized now.
Yeah, so you mentioned there are 12 hooks. Those are released in 2 sets of 6. When Dragon arrives, they are also initiated in those 2 sets of 6. So we'll be watching once that command is sent. It's also very interesting. Dragon will conduct very short burns to help it depart from the International Space Station instead of the springs like we might see on a Russian Soyuz.
Yeah. Now, at the moment, Dragon is in this final configuration before undocking. We're waiting for mission operators to conduct their go, no-go poll. So there's a set of flight rules that all of the folks in mission control are referencing.
Então, dentro de instantes aí já teremos aí a
checagem
final, né, do go no go, né, né, e checagem dos sistemas aí de liberação então da cápsula Dragon. Somente então 4 horas e 1 minuto no horário de Brasília.
Yeah, and once the undocking sequence is complete, Dragon does use its Draco engines to thrust away.
Estamos vendo aí o diagrama, né, logo após a desacoplagem, né, da cápsula Dragon, né, que eles vão então fazer a circundar a Terra, né, fazendo aí 2 voltas e meia, uma volta e meia. Até então fazer aí a reentrada e o splashdown na costa da Flórida.
March 11th, Dragon will go through the deorbit entry and landing process, or splashdown, I should say, and that covers all of the operations.
Nós vamos acompanhar então todo esse processo aí do retorno e do splashdown a partir das 9h55 da noite.
And finally, splashdown off the Florida coast. As you heard mentioned earlier, that will be off Tampa, the coast of Tampa. At which point, teams will recover the Crew 5 astronauts inside Crew Dragon from the water.
4h02 da manhã, no horário de Brasília.
Estamos
então acompanhando a missão Crew 5. Dragon Endeavor undocking.
Operators who have a wealth of experience about the various different systems on Dragon, as well
Então menos de 2 minutos
the crew member. We've even got flight surgeons
para o
on
undocking.
there.
Estamos aguardando apenas a confirmação.
The individual needs of the crew members and also their health and safety. That second row from the back has the core and the mission director, as well as the SIS-2. There's a number of specialists in there. And the front row in front of that there's a SIS-1 operator who's responsible for all the hooks and avionics and systems. The call that you mentioned earlier was actually from the SIS-2 saying, hey, we did our leak check. The leak rates look good, so we're not going to vent any additional gas off of the International Space Station. Because of course we got to bring all the gas up to the space station that we use.
And usually you're one of those voices that we're hearing sometimes as one of the systems engineers down there. So loving having you up here today. But we're expecting that go, no go for undocking in the next few minutes.
Estamos aí então na expectativa da checagem então do go, no go.
And again, we are expecting the undock command to be
Station Houston, Space Ground 2 for exercise.
So just listening to the loops right now.
And Houston, go ahead on 2.
Hey, just a friendly reminder, for the undock today, any exercise should be complete by 7:15.
Exercise complete by 7:15. Copy, thanks.
So that was the voice of our Capcom, or capsule communicator in Mission Control Houston, speaking with the crew members on the space station. It is Saturday for them, so they are off schedule a little bit today.
Station and Dragon, Spacex on the big loop, vestibule leak check nominal.
Dragon copy.
And that was a call from the core, the crew resources and operations engineer here at the Hawthorne Mission Control, letting the crew know that we had a successful leak check. which means we're getting real
4
close to
e
that
5
go,
da
no-go
manhã.
for the undock sequence.
Estamos na expectativa agora
One
do
thing I
undock.
find really interesting is they were reminding them that
Confirmação
any
aí do
exercise
undock.
that's happening right now on the space station needs to be complete by the time that undock command is sent. We don't want any extra loads or forces being imparted during the time that Crew Dragon is preparing to separate or separating from the space station. And that can come from something as small as someone jogging on the treadmill or using the Advanced Resistive Exercise Device, or ARED.
Yeah, and the crew members' time on board, oh, actually, hang on just a sec. They're having some conversations on the loops about the go, no-go poll. So the mission director has just requested the flight control team to complete their go, no-go poll. So we'll expect that call shortly here. But we were talking a little bit about the exercise on station. The crew members' time on space station is pretty heavily scripted. And I also understand that both for health reasons and also just for their
Estamos aí na
emotional
expectativa do
well-being, they really
undock.
value that exercise time.
Yeah, and they have different
Mas estamos aguardando então
like I mentioned
a
earlier, they do have a treadmill.
go no go
Things are
para a
modified a little bit
liberação então da
differently on the
cápsula
space station.
Dragon.
You do have to buckle in so that when you run, you don't
Que já era para ter
run off the
acontecido, né?
treadmill every
Mas
time.
atrasou
But
bocadinho.
they exercise approximately 2 hours a day so that they can maintain their muscle mass and their bone density. Because if you're not using those things in space for a period of 6 months, you can come home and not be as good of shape as when you left. So
Yeah.
they usually come back pretty healthy and strong thanks to all those studies and their exercise.
Só falta mais
Yeah,
aí
and actually the
pra gente
transition
completar
from
a
microgravity
marca
to
então de
gravity does cause the
320
fluids in
inscritos
your
no
body
canal
to
aí.
shift a little bit.
Obrigado a
But
todos
also,
aí
yeah, your heart actually
pelas
will flow
inscrições,
a little bit
pelos
differently
likes.
because the feedback receptors
Falta apenas mais um
for
para
your blood
chegar à marca
pressure
então de
expect there to
320.
be gravity on your body. So the crew on Crew 5 before splashdown will actually take a few actions to load up on some fluids and wear some special garments to kind of help with that fluid shift and help with adjusting back from microgravity to a gravity environment.
Yeah, it's very interesting. A lot of that
Lembrando, né, que ainda
shifts
hoje,
to your head,
mais
from
tarde,
your
a
legs,
partir
from
das
what I
2 horas
understand.
da tarde, vamos
And
acompanhar
we had Rajachari
missão
on the Crew 6 launch
Good Luck
broadcast
Have
last
Fun,
week, who
a nova
mentioned that
tentativa de
even astronauts who
lançamento
don't
então da
wear
Relative
glasses
Space
are prescribed glasses when they go to space because
às
that fluid, from what
19h35.
they believe and understand,
Vamos
can put pressure
acompanhar
on your eyeballs and change your vision while in space.
a missão
Yeah,
também da
my
Rocket
favorite fun
Lab.
fact about that is it also changes your sense of taste.
E
So you
às
hear a lot of astronauts saying
21h55,
that they really
vamos
love hot
acompanhar
sauce and
então
spicy
o
food.
retorno
Yes, I've
So
heard
if
e o
you're
that.
ever
splashdown
sending a package to space, send some
da
hot sauce.
Dragon
This is a live view
Endurance.
from inside Dragon Endurance. You've got Nicole Mann, your commander of Crew 5, on the left.
Estamos aí a bordo então
and
da
Josh
Crew 5
Cassada,
da
pilot,
Dragon
on the right. You can see
Endurance.
they are monitoring the crew displays in front of them. Again, a fully
Aguardando só
autonomous
apenas
flight,
então
is what we
a
anticipate, but
liberação
that is where
para
they would be able to
o
take
undocking.
over and take control of the spacecraft if need be. However, things looking good for that undock command to be sent approximately 7 minutes from now.
This is a really great view of the crew displays. So there are 3 displays in the Dragon spacecraft. On the left-hand side of the screen, you can actually see the forward view. So they're looking at
Nessa falta
an
apenas
imager
inscrito
that's
aí
looking
para a
at
gente
the
completar
docking
então a
port.
marca de
And sort of in the upper right corner,
320
they can actually
inscritos no
see
canal.
a representation of which thrusters are firing on the
Agradecer
vehicle.
todo mundo aí
In the
que
middle,
está se
they've got a set
inscrevendo,
of their
né, deixando o
procedures.
like.
So
Cada
in this
inscrição de
case, it's
vocês
what
é
we
muito
refer to as event
importante,
details, but
né,
it's
para
really the
aumentar
list
então
of
a rede de
events that'll
relevância
happen as the vehicle transitions through all
do
these
canal
states.
para que
And
mais
then they've got a
pessoas
map of
novas,
where
né,
they are
possam
on the world,
conhecer
which also
também a
gives them
nossa
some
transmissão.
indication of when burns are upcoming. And then on the right side, it looks like Josh has got a status page up of the vehicle. You can sort of see there's a bar
Não
there
só
on the
nas nossas
left.
transmissões, né,
If
como
we
também
were
os
to get
nossos
any alerts or
vídeos
cautions on board
aí
the
de
vehicle, you'd be
matemática
able to quickly move from that
e de
page
programação em
and
Python.
address and triage those alerts and see if they have any impact or crew actions associated with them.
Speaking of that map of the world, currently the International Space Station is flying 270 statute miles just south of Australia. And again, tomorrow we're expecting that splashdown to come just off the coast of Tampa, Florida. And you can see their visors are also still up, so I anticipate that they'll get the call to lower those visors here shortly as we are awaiting that undock command.
Yeah, the visors are one of the components that the crew can open or close without having an impact on the leak checks
Então,
that they
dentro de
performed
instantes, né,
earlier. We
vamos ter aí a
asked that they
liberação para o
keep all of their
undocking.
gloves and zippers.
Endurance
Aí agora,
SpaceX
nesse
on the
momento,
big
aí
loop
eles já
run
estão fechando os
reconfigurations
capacetes.
for undock complete and nominal. Houston and Hawthorne teams have pulled go for the undock sequence start at 07:15 and separation at 07:20. When ready, confirm visors down and crew are ready for undock and departure.
Então já foi dada a liberação para iniciar a sequência do undocking.
All visors are down. We are ready for undock and departure.
Sequência do undocking, então, já foi
Copy.
confirmada para dar o início.
And right on time, they got the call to lower those visors because Dragon is go to undock both from teams here in Hawthorne as well as Mission Control in Houston, and the crew reporting that themselves. So now we get to wait for the undocking sequence to begin, and once it happens, it'll take less than 5 minutes for Dragon to separate from the International Space Station, where it has called home for almost 6 months.
Yeah, and the first step in that automatic undocking sequence is for the umbilicals to retract. We've got 2 umbilicals on the Dragon spacecraft that connect Dragon to the space station, and they provide power from the space station's power system, those big solar arrays, as well as telemetry and a command path between the vehicles while Dragon
Então,
is
dentro de
docked.
instantes, aí
Now, once
vamos
the
ter o
umbilicals
undocking.
are detached, then Dragon will unlatch itself from the space station. It'll release what are
Então, a
called
sequência já
12
foi
hard capture
autorizada
hubs
para
in
dar o
2
início.
separate phases. You might hear that referred to as
Então,
the
devemos
games
ter o
hooks.
undocking dentro de instantes,
We
aí
need
às
11 of those 12
4h20.
hooks to have a good seal on the vestibule, which is that pressurized volume in between the station and Dragon. Of course, that volume is unpressurized right now since we're about to depart. Now, all of that takes about 4.5 minutes, and then Dragon will be ready to depart from station and will begin moving itself away using a firing of its Draco thrusters.
And like I mentioned earlier, the initial departure for Dragon from the space station looks different than Soyuz because Soyuz relies on springs to push it away from a docking port, whereas we'll see those 2 short thruster firings to undock. Those are using a combination of the 12 Draco engines around the base of the capsule. The first breaks any stiction between Dragon and the docking port, and the second will slowly back the spacecraft away. So we are expecting the call for the undocking sequence to begin right around 11:15 p.m. Pacific time. So in the next few minutes, we should get that call, but everything checking out so far. We've got all of our crew members suited up in their seats, just monitoring the ride home.
Yeah, so those thruster firings are actually pretty helpful as well because they give us a little mini checkout of the propulsion system before we start using it for some of those bigger burns. We actually did do a propulsion system checkout ahead of the undocking sequence. So we've talked a little bit about the leak checks that happened, and we've talked about the vestibule depressurization. But actually, over the last few days, there have been a number of checkouts performed to make sure that the comm systems, the propulsion systems, the suits, everything in the vehicle is healthy in the correct configuration for undock. So this is kind of that one extra free check we get with the Draco firings, and it means one less mechanism on the vehicle.
Estamos só aguardando então a liberação para o undocking.
Until that undocking command is sent and that sequence begins, those hooks releasing. Now, as we mentioned, this is coming about 15 minutes behind when we initially thought we would
Então
undock.
será
Got a series of checks
por
that
agora,
we
né,
go
às
through,
4h20.
both teams on the ground and the crew, obviously, on the International Space Station, both in Dragon and on the station side, need to make sure everything's checked out before departure. But we have a window for these undockings that will still allow the crew members to splash down at the same time tomorrow. So it's a little bit different. Actually, it's quite a lot different from those instantaneous launch windows that we have. Whereas if you do not launch on that exact second, your trajectory is not lined up to meet with the International Space Station. So you get a little more grace when it comes to an undocking.
Yeah, and a lot of that has to do with the orbital mechanics.
É
When
importante
you're
termos
higher up
imagens
in
do lado de
orbit,
fora,
you
né, da
actually need less
cápsula
thrust to
Dragon
get a bigger
Endeavour.
change in your
Aí
orbit.
do lado
There
esquerdo.
are some Newtonian equations you could go work on to figure out why. I'm not going to try to explain it all right now. because I probably wouldn't do a very good job of it. But it is a function of
Estamos
the
aguardando
orbital
só o
mechanics.
undocking.
And because of that, while we do try to leave on time, it's more important that we review the data and understand that the vehicle is in a healthy state. And Dragon can actually make up a little bit of a delay, or even if we were to depart a little bit early on the undock sequence. There's a set of onboard flight computers.
Endurance and Station Spacex on the Big Loop undock sequence commanded.
Dragon copy.
Undocking sequência iniciada.
Call from the core there that the undock sequence has started.
Confirmado então o início da sequência de undocking.
So with Dragon getting ready for the undock sequence, I think it'd probably be a good time to check in with Dan at Mission Control at Johnson. Dan?
Hey, thanks, Shiva. Yeah, we can see the umbilicals retracting. They're just about completed.
Umbilical demate complete and nominal.
Dragon copy.
All right, we heard the confirmation the umbilicals have demated. Again, those provided hardline power and data connections. Those have now detached. The first
Menos
set
de
of
4
6
minutos.
hooks are now driving. Reminder, we've got 2 different sets of hooks, each in sets of 6, 12 total. After the first set has released, we are committed to an undocking. So that first set, 6, is driving now, and we expect all of this to take another 3 minutes or so before we get that physical separation when those thrusters on Dragon will fire.
Estamos aí já
Crew Dragon Endurance
com a sequência então do undocking iniciada. Dentro de instantes, então, teremos o undocking confirmado para vocês aí na tela.
Sequence being commanded right on time at the new time. At about 15 minutes after the hour, the first set of hooks are now driving to release.
Estamos aí com as imagens da Dragon Endurance.
Immediately start to disengage, and then once those are separated, the thrusters will fire. We'll get the 2 quick undocking burns. That first one only being about a second and a half, so just a real quick pulse of those service section Dracos to start backing Dragon away, and then a slightly longer one of about 5 seconds to increase that rate. But we are on our way right now, still a couple of minutes until we get that physical separation, still waiting for that first set of hooks to disengage. But again, a lot already done to get here.
Estamos só no aguardo.
Still in the attitude control over on the US segment, we've done something called inhibiting desats. So essentially no thrusters on the station are able to fire right now. So attitude fully in control of the...
Lembrando então que
First set of hooks open and nominal, second set of hooks traveling.
Lembrando que então a gente vai acompanhar também o retorno a partir das 21h55 da noite no horário dia de hoje.
This next set of 6 are going to open. We should have them open within the next 2 minutes, and then we'll get physical separation. We'll call you an undocking time.
Teremos o undocking. Estamos só aguardando.
And we're seeing nominal performance so far on the second set of hooks. Standing by should be within about a minute
E ainda hoje também teremos 2 missões.
Opened, and there will be no physical mechanism still in place holding Dragon to the international docking adapter.
A partir das 2 da tarde, a Good Luck Have Fun.
To the forward port on the
E
station to that
às 19h35,
as soon as this
Stronger
next set
Together.
opens within the next minute, Dragon's going to fire a real quick burst, again about a second and a half to start backing away, and that'll be our physical separation, and that'll be our time of undocking. After that initial undocking burn, we'll do another one lasting about 5 sequence to keep backing away, and then we'll do a couple of
Tá chegando aí, né? Deixa o like, clique na transmissão, quem puder compartilhar, compartilhe. Quem ainda não se inscreveu, curte o canal, né? Se inscreva. Subscribe, please.
Where it's been for more than 150 days attached to this forward port on the space station.
Daqui a pouquinho aí. Estamos só aguardando a confirmação.
Standing by for physical separation.
Estamos aguardando, então, apenas a confirmação da separação. Seria agora, né, às 4h20. Estamos aí aguardando. Undocking. Nesse momento, então, às 4h20 da manhã, no horário de Brasília, confirmado undocking da Dragon Endurance.
Open depart burn 1 has fired Dragon Endurance undocked 262 statute
Docking
miles.
confirmado com sucesso aí da Dragon Endurance. Às 4h20 da manhã. Falei da tarde não, às 4h20 da manhã.
So a successful separation again, Dragon undocking at 1:20 a.m. Central Time, 2:20 a.m. Eastern Time, with Dragon and station flying 262 statute miles over the Coral Sea off the northeastern coast of Australia.
Então tivemos aí o undocking, né, sobre a região da Austrália,
Burn 0 nominal.
confirmada com sucesso aí às 4h20 da manhã.
All right, so undock burns completed. That depart burn 0 completed. Next one coming up in just a couple of minutes, but with Dragon now flying free, I'm going to toss it back over to Shiva and Leah at MCCX in Hawthorne to take us through the rest of the flight.
Thanks a bunch, Dan. So we had some great shots there of the first depart burn. We're coming up on depart burn. So that was the depart burn 0. Now we're coming up on depart burn number 1. Now this will be a short firing of the Dragon's Draco thrusters. The burn just lasting about 16 seconds. You can see that Dragon has begun to fly away from the space station, and
E aí agora
initial
a
depart
Dragon,
burns
né, está fazendo
increase
então a
the
parte
range
da
from the station, so we can
afastamento
get away from the
da
International
Estação
Space
Espacial
Station and get
Internacional,
out of,
para
these
que
various
depois
different
comece
spheres
então
of control,
o processo do
around the
início
vehicle that keep both of the vehicles safe.
da descida, né? Onde ele vai fazer então uma volta e meia em torno da Terra, até chegar então no momento final de aproximação com a Terra e iniciar então o processo de retorno e o splashdown, que é mais ou menos 19 horas.
This depart burn 0 puts crew Dragon Endurance and Nicole, Josh, Koichi, and Anna on their journey home.
Então estamos aí no processo então, do afastamento 0, né, indo para o ponto 1. Now the burn 0 or the beat burn 1. Vocês poderão ver aí no diagrama. Undocking confirmado às 4h20 da manhã, horário de Brasília, 2h20 da manhã, no horário Eastern Time. 7h20 da manhã, horário internacional.
Your spacecraft must be configured so that it would not cross that boundary for at least 4 orbits, even if for some reason it lost all maneuvering. So we monitor that before and after departure. Crew Dragon continuing to make its way further from the space station.
We're continuing to get some really cool views from the International Space Station cameras. So this one's got Dragon, and it looks like one of the robotic arms in the foreground, Dragon in the background. And of course, the opportunity today was a little bit delayed from the initial timing, but as a result, it turned out that we had better communications coverage so we could actually get some of these views.
Estamos vendo aí então o processo do afastamento
I really like your explanation
da Dragon Endeavour,
da
Estação Espacial Internacional.
Flown into a major airport, there's an air traffic control team who's governing who can come into the airport, what timing they should go do that. And the keep out sphere is one of those imaginary constructs that allows the flight control teams of the visiting vehicles as well as the flight control team in Johnson to make sure that everyone is safe and no one is inadvertently entering to a place that is habited by people.
E ainda não se inscreveu no canal, né? Dá aquela forcinha. Falta só mais um inscrito para a gente chegar então à marca de 320. E quem ainda não deixou o like, Deixa o like para ajudar então aí no aumento da relevância aí na transmissão.
It also helps us monitor those arrivals and departures of any and all visiting spacecraft.
Station on the big loop.
Station.
Duke and crew 5.
Agora estamos indo no primeiro ponto
Departure. You
de
guys did a
afastamento.
great job up here. We're gonna miss you. Godspeed.
Então saímos do ponto 0, agora vamos para o ponto 1.
We'll be following along.
E aí depois desse ponto, então, vamos iniciar o processo de descida de órbita até o ponto então de aproximação para a Terra.
Mission Control in Johnson, the International Space Station, visiting vehicle, so Dragon, and then, of course, controllers here in Hawthorne.
Yeah, and we were talking about the approach ellipsoid. So what we're in right now, where we're talking on that big loop, this is joint operations. Both mission control teams working together with.
Lembrando que ainda hoje vamos ter aí a partir das 2 da tarde. Some good luck, have fun, a nova tentativa de voo do primeiro veículo feito em uma impressora 3D da Relative Space. E depois à noite, né, a partir das 19h35, são Stronger Together, Rocket Lab, e às 9h55 da noite vamos acompanhar então
Depart burn 1 nominal, and we see Dragon on a nominal trajectory away from station. At this time you are go to doff suits per procedure 4.012, and finally I have a reminder that the big loop will be deactivated following Dragon's exit from the approach ellipsoid.
Já foi confirmado aí que foi completada o processo então, de afastamento da Estação Espacial Internacional e foi dada então a autorização para iniciar então o processo de descida de órbita. E às 9h55 da noite nós vamos acompanhar então o processo do retorno. Cápsula Dragon Endurance da Crew 5. Tudo isso ainda hoje. Então vimos aí a voz da Nicole Mann.
And gain some perspective on the place we've called home for almost half a year.
Station copies, Duke. Safe flight.
Are incredibly proud.
So a few
It's
things.
absolutely overwhelming to be backing away from the International Space Station and gain some perspective on the place we've called home for almost half a year.
Acho que essa voz é do Cassada.
While we were there, and to everyone who had a role in Expedition 68, whether direct or indirect, you should feel the exact same way. We thank you, and we're excited to get back to that beautiful planet of ours and those wonderful people who live on it. Thank you.
That was a beautiful view of the space station. I see it. All the mission control centers all over the world. Thank you very much for your support.
Esse aí é a voz do astronauta da JAXA, do Koichi Wakata.
Thank you. Arigatou gozaimashita.
E agora a voz da cosmonauta russa Anna Kikina. Então deixando aí as suas mensagens de agradecimento aí por esse período, né, de 6 meses. Eles passaram em órbita
Dragon Houston on the Big Loop. Dragon has exited the Keep Out sphere. We wish you safe travels and looking forward to seeing you back on Earth.
Copy, Houston.
So we just heard from the Capcom, the capsule communicator in Houston, that Crew Dragon has exited the Keep Out sphere. That was the imaginary boundary we were talking about just moments ago. 200 meters
Então,
in
nesse
radius
momento,
around
a
the
Dragon
station. One of those safety
Endurance
zones while we are in
está
joint
iniciando o
operations to
processo,
help us
então, de
monitor any
descida de
spacecraft
órbita.
arriving or departing. So before moving into the Keep Out sphere, again, that the rule essentially is the spacecraft, if it for some reason lost maneuvering capability, it would not cross into that border for at least 4 orbits. But of course, departing, we don't have that same requirement. They are now well out of the Keep Out sphere and heading toward the approach ellipsoid.
Yeah, and that's part of the reason why we have all of those flight rules and the mission control teams there.
Nós
Each
estamos
operator is
acompanhando aí a
evaluating
missão
their
por 5.
systems to ensure that Dragon is safe to
Então,
enter
do undock
both the approach
Dragon
ellipsoid.
foi às
SpaceX on
4h20
Dragon to ground for
da
soon
manhã, no
storage.
horário de Brasília.
Go ahead, Jake.
Hey Josh, I've just got a reminder here, 6 months later to store suits with helmet visors closed. How copy?
We got it. Thanks a lot for the reminder.
Some friendly words from your friendly neighborhood core. Of course, the crew have been on the space station for about 6 months. So the little quirks of how do you pack things in the vehicle safely to make sure, in this case, that the visors don't get scratched or damaged. Just reminding them to keep them closed
Então
in the
agora a
suit bag.
próxima etapa aí
We
será
do
então
actually get
a
some training
parte então
on
de
the space station
aproximação
to
com
kind
a
of
Terra.
remind them about some quirks about the vehicle, actions that they need to take during the undock sequence and the departure sequence. So Josh acknowledging that.
Everybody needs a refresher every now and then. And again, we are outside of the Keep Out sphere. We are standing by for approach ellipsoid exit. That's a 4 kilometer by 2 kilometer invisible boundary.
E tá chegando novo aí no canal, né? Sejam bem-vindos. Estamos acompanhando então a missão Crew 5. Undock. É que foi às 4h20 da manhã, no horário de Brasília. E mais tarde, então, às 2h da tarde, vamos acompanhar a missão The Lucky Have Fun, da Relative Space. E depois, às 19h35, a missão da Rocket Lab. E às 21h55, nós vamos acompanhar, então, o retorno e o splashdown para o 5 Dragon Endurance.
That gives time for ground operators on the ISS side to consider an adjustment to the ISS's trajectory.
Então, quem ainda não se inscreveu no canal, se inscreva e ative o sininho, né, para não perder então nenhuma live.
Dragon, SpaceX,
E deixa o like, né, para também ajudar
cabin mic, good comm
na
check.
relevância aí das transmissões.
So call there from Koichi.
We have you loud and clear also. Thank you.
Now, at this phase, because we're outside of Depart Burn 1 and on our way out of the approach
Nessa falta
ellipsoid,
apenas mais um inscrito aí para a gente completar a marca de 320.
That means taking off their suits. As we talked about a little bit earlier,
More
there's an
one
umbilical that
subscribe
connects the
for
suits
complete
to the comm system. But once they're out of
320.
that, they actually have to use a cabin mic that's in the cabin, and we always want to maintain communication with the crew in case we need to provide them any urgent instructions or if they need to give us any information. So it's just a check there that all the systems are working as they proceed into a more comfortable phase of the phasing mission.
Now we are continuing to stand by for that approach ellipsoid exit, but if you saw as Dragon was undocking from the International Space Station, the colors shifted on the spacecraft itself, and that's because the International Space Station and Dragon entered an orbital nighttime. So They see a sunrise and a sunset every 45 minutes, which seems pretty inspiring, to be honest. And they even mentioned the beautiful sunset that they got as they were traveling away from the space station. Dragon is now about 600 meters away from the International Space Station, with depart burns 0 and 1 complete as planned, and heading toward the approach ellipsoid exit. Now again, it's about a 19-hour ride home for the crew inside Dragon. Hopefully they get a nap in there somewhere, but they won't really be on duty during that time because the spacecraft is an autonomous one, so they don't need to take over and pilot it whatsoever. They are definitely trained to do so, as we've discussed, but if things are moving smoothly, which we anticipate, they should be able to rest and enjoy 19 more hours in space before they are back home sweet home.
There might be a little bit of a nice change of pace to have some off-duty time. I think I heard Dan mention earlier that the crew did have to sleep shift a little bit for this particular undock opportunity. We even caught a few views of them sort of resting up while they were in the vehicle waiting for the undock sequence. So during this off-duty period, they'll be free to use the amenities on board Dragon, have a meal, to just sleep if they want to. And then, of course, as we get closer to the actual entry deorbit and landing sequence, then we will make sure that they have redonned their suits, have done their preparation for fluid loading, have confirmed that the cargo is all in a safe configuration for entry, and then they'll get suited up again in their seats for the deorbit burn and entry sequence.
Yeah, things are pretty quiet, and from now until then, the next, like you said, big milestone, which they'll need to put their suits on for, will be that deorbit burn. That afterwards, we'll see the nose cone close. Obviously, that was open when we departed station. That's how the crew members ingress and egress the station. They have not used that side hatch in 6 months, so they'll finally get to open that up once again tomorrow once they're pulled on to Shannon, the ship that is waiting off the coast of Tampa for the splashdown tomorrow night. Yeah, and we had some views of it earlier when we were looking at the camera behind the crew. So if you can imagine in your mind's eye where the center display was, sort of straight past that is the forward hatch, and that's the hatch that they've been using to enter the International Space Station. That's one of the hatches that we closed today. The side hatch was a little bit lower down. The crew don't really interact with that. They can, of course, open it in an emergency on the ground, but the recovery teams will actually do most of the work there so the crew can stay nice and comfortable in their seats. And that also helps with some of the microgravity to gravity adjustment that we had been talking about. So I want to read off a few of these stats for our crew members. 3 of these crew members on Crew 5 are first-time flyers: Nicole Mann, Josh Cassada, and Anna Kikina. And then Koichi Wakata, he actually just completed 500 days in space just a few days ago. He will, by the time of splashdown tomorrow, have 505 days in space across 5 different missions. And for the other crew members, they will have logged 157 days in space by the time they splash down tomorrow. This crew saw 6 visiting vehicles arrive and depart. One of those was a cargo Dragon, Spacex 26. That brought up some of the solar arrays that some of these crew members installed during some spacewalks earlier this year. There were 2 Russian Progress resupply ships. Of course,
Então, né, lembrando que o undock foi confirmado aí às 4h20 da manhã, no horário de Brasília. E agora, nesse momento, a cápsula Dragon Endurance está então fazendo o processo, iniciando o processo então de aproximação então com a Terra, descida de órbita. E daqui então a 20 horas, né, nós vamos acompanhar. E 20 horas depois, né, nós vamos acompanhar aí o retorno e o splashdown na costa da Flórida.
It doesn't have all the same life support systems, it doesn't have the displays, the seats, because the primary thing we're taking up is science and cargo for the International Space Station. The crew actually play a more hands-on role during the approach process too. They've got procedures where they monitor the approach. Sort of if the ISS is pretty high up, and so it takes some time for communications and commands that we send from the ground to reach the vehicle. But the crew can actually send direct commands to the vehicle during the approach sequence if they needed to. So those crew were busy during that approach opportunity and the undocking as well.
Oh, and of course, the unloading and the reloading and all of the science experiments that they brought with them. So we're coming up on about 1,000 meters away from the International Space Station. It was just a few minutes ago that we saw Dragon undock right on time, around 11:20 p.m. Pacific time. We are still waiting for it to exit the approach ellipsoid. Those two depart burns, 0 and 1, they are on the order of 16 and 21 seconds. So they really get the spacecraft moving, though. And we anticipate that call to the crew to come just about any moment now that we are outside the approach ellipsoid.
I actually just heard some calls on the loops here that we're out of the approach ellipsoid. So we'll probably hear a similar call from
and station
the core. There it is.
on the big loop.
Neste momento, então, estamos aí na parte do
and is on a 24-hour safe free drift
então,
trajectory.
a aproximação, então, né, com a Terra,
Figure com for Dragon to ground.
e
in
com as
preparation
descidas de
for
órbita.
deactivation.
E aí, então, vamos então ter um período longo de sem comunicação com rádio, né? Nesse período aí de aproximação com a Terra.
Dragon copy.
So the core, Jake, who we can see in the little window there.
Safe travels, Endurance.
Indicating to the crew that we've exited the approach ellipsoid. Again, that's that 4 kilometer by 2 kilometer by 2 kilometer ellipse. So the long end is along the direction that the International Space Station is traveling around the Earth. We call that the forward direction. Core indicating that we're outside of the approach ellipsoid. Because we're outside of the approach ellipsoid and outside of join ops, we're actually going to be deactivating that big loop. So this is probably the last time that the crew are going to be talking to the International Space Station crew on this particular mission. I'm sure they'll talk to them when they get back home to planet Earth in about 19 hours from now.
Yeah, absolutely. So since it has exited the approach ellipsoid, like you mentioned, those joint operations are over. Crew Dragon is going to move into it's the rest period for the crew, essentially, like we talked about. They have doffed their suits. They're able to store those suits. They will, like you said, get the chance to sleep. And we are still targeting splashdown tomorrow at 8:02 p.m. Central, 9:02 p.m. Eastern Time. And that, I think, about wraps us up.
Yeah, they do have a couple more departure burns, and they'll have some return burns that adjust their phasing. But now that the NASA astronauts Nicole Mann, Cassada, JAXA astronaut Koichi Wakata, and Roscosmos cosmonaut Kikina have departed the space station, it'll take them about 19 hours to make their way back to planet Earth. They're in the middle of doffing their spacesuits. We actually have them dry the spacesuits, clean it out a little bit in case they got a little bit sweaty or anything inside while they were wearing them. The splashdown opportunity is targeted off the west coast of Florida near Tampa around 6:02 p.m. Pacific time tomorrow, or 9:02 p.m. Eastern time. And that'll be followed by one of our SpaceX recovery vessels approaching the vehicle, doing some safety checks, and then we'll recover them on board and then bring them out of the capsule so they can start their ride back home. Now, as they rest up on the Dragon spacecraft, our teams on the ground are going to continue to keep an eye on the weather around the splashdown opportunity to make sure that it is safe for that deorbit sequence and then eventually splashdown. And right now, the weather is looking fantastic out there.
And it, well, 9:02 p.m. I'm thinking 6:02 p.m. here. I thought we might be able to see it, but maybe a little dark over in Florida. So even though we're wrapping up coverage here in Hawthorne, the NASA team in Houston is still going to be monitoring the next phases of the Crew 5 mission. So our friends at JSC will provide continuous live audio-only coverage during Crew 5's journey home until we rejoin
Então, nesse
approximately
momento
an
também,
hour
né,
prior to
estamos
splashdown
encerrando
tomorrow.
aí a
You can
nossa
find that audio-only
transmissão
link by visiting
de hoje, né?
nasa.gov/live
Acompanhamos então
and
ao
clicking
vivo
the
aí
mission
o
audio link,
undock
or
da Dragon Endurance na Estação Espacial Internacional. Então, nos vemos agora a partir das 2 horas da tarde com a nova tentativa de voo da missão Good Luck and Have Fun da Relative Space. E depois né, às 19h35, nós vamos acompanhar a missão Stronger Together da Rocket Lab. E a partir das 9h55 da noite, nós vamos acompanhar então o processo do retorno e o splashdown da Dragon Endurance. Fiquem ligados aí então na nossa programação ao longo do dia, né? E também nas nossas redes sociais. O link está na descrição do transmissão. E quem ainda não se inscreveu no canal, né? Se inscreva, né? Deixa o like e ative o sininho aí para não perder nenhuma transmissão, tá certo? Então encerramos a transmissão por hora por aqui. Nos veremos então mais tarde, a partir então das 2 horas da tarde. Beleza? Então, tenha todos aí um ótimo dia. E nos veremos à tarde então com a missão Good Luck, Have Fun, Relative Space. Fui! Agradeço então a todos aí pela audiência, pela sua paciência, todos aí pelas suas inscrições e pelos likes.